The frost came early that year, and it came hard. By the second week of December, the lane below Rothwell Hall had frozen into ruts of iron, and the well in the kitchen yard wore a skin of ice by noon that had to be broken again by supper. The smell of the house in that season was tallow and wet wool, and the cold mineral smell of snow, not yet fallen but coming, and under it, always, coal smoke going up thin and grey from 40 chimneys into a sky the colour of an old coin. Susanna Reid was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. She was 25, narrow through the shoulders, with red, chapped hands that never quite warmed even in July, and she had been a widow for the better part of a year. She kept to the nursery wing of Rothwell Hall, where she was called upon for fevers and colic and the small grey hours when a child would not settle, because she had her mother's hands for it, and her mother's low, unhurried voice, and a certain trick of knowing what ailed a small thing before it could say so itself. She did not think of this as a gift. She thought of it as the one thing she had left that was worth anything to anybody. Her own son slept in a basket by her cot in the room under the eaves. Tom was not yet a year old, fat-cheeked, quiet-natured, the image of his father, who had gone into the ground the previous winter after a fall from a hay wagon that no one, not even Susanna, called anything worse than an accident. She had come to Rothwell Hall 3 months later because the alternative was the parish, and she would not raise her son on parish bread if there was another way to be had. Before the week was out, the house would be talking of nothing else. She did not know that yet, on the night it began. She only knew that the wind had come round to the north, and that something in the set of the sky told her snow was close, and that she had banked the nursery fire, and gone down to the kitchen for the last of the milk before bed, the way she did most nights, because Tom woke at 2 and there was no sense waking the whole house for it. The kitchen was empty and warm, coals banked red under grey ash, and it was there, going for the door to the yard to fetch in the milk pail left cooling on the step, that she heard it. Not a cry, a sound smaller than a cry, thin and worn down, coming from somewhere near the kitchen wall. She stood a moment with her hand on the latch. She did not call out. She only opened the door. The bundle lay in the shelter of the step, wrapped in a shawl gone stiff with cold, and inside it was a child no more than a few weeks old, blue about the mouth, its cry already spent to almost nothing. There was no note. There was no one in the yard, no cart tracks fresh enough to follow. Only the wind and the first flakes beginning to come down slant across the light from the kitchen window. She did not scream. She did not run for the housekeeper. She knelt in the snow in her nightclothes and gathered the child against her own body, under her shawl, skin to skin, the way her mother had taught her for a chilled lamb before ever she had taught her for a person, and she carried it inside and shut the door with her heel. She knew what the parish would do with a foundling in December. She had watched it done once, to a woman 2 streets from her own girlhood home, and the child had not lived the winter in that cold stone place with too many mouths and too little coal. She knew, too, what it would mean for her if she were found harbouring an infant, not her own, not reported, in a great house, not hers, to make such decisions in. She thought of this for the length of time it took to cross the kitchen floor. Then she stopped thinking of it at all, and put the kettle on, and began to rub warmth back into a stranger's child, with her own red hands. She worked through the night by the kitchen fire, feeding the infant with a scrap of linen soaked in warmed milk and sugar water, singing nothing, saying nothing, only working, the way she worked at anything, without waste and without complaint. By the time the sky had gone from black to the flat grey of a snow morning, the child was breathing easier, and had cried once, properly a strong, thin wail that she muffled against her shoulder with something that was almost relief and almost tears, though she did not let it become either. She would have done the same for any creature left to die on a doorstep in a hard winter, and she told herself so, plainly, the way she told herself most things. She wanted no credit for it. She wanted, if anything, not to be seen at all. But she was seen. Above the kitchen yard, on the second floor, a light had been burning long past any sensible hour in the window of the estate room, where the Duke of Rothwell had been going over accounts he did not need to go over at midnight, because sleep had not been an easy companion to him since his mother died in a cold season very like this one, attended, at the last, by people who did their duty, and no more. He heard, or thought he heard, some small sound below, and crossed to the window, and looked down into the yard in time to see a woman in her night-clothes kneel in the snow and gather something to her chest, and carry it in out of the cold, without calling for another living soul. He did not know her name yet. He knew only what he had seen. She did not know then that the master of Rothwell Hall had watched the whole of it from above, and that he had not gone back to his ledgers that night, and that from that hour forward he watched for her the way a man watches for weather he has learned to trust. In the morning she took the child to Mrs. Hale, the housekeeper, because there was no way around it, and she would not lie about where it had come from. Mrs. Hale was a broad, dry woman of some 60 years who had run Rothwell Hall through 2 masters and had buried a husband and 2 sons of her own, and she looked at the infant in Susanna's arms for a long moment before she said anything at all. "You ought to have woken me, Mrs." Hale said. "I did not think it could wait for waking anybody. And if he had died in the night, in your care, with no one told—" "Then I should have had that to answer for," Susanna said. "I would rather answer for that than for having let him die on the step while I went for permission." Mrs. Hale did not smile, quite, but something in her face eased, the way a hard winter road eases under the first thaw. Not all at once, only at the edges. She sent for the parish doctor herself, and said nothing yet to the family above stairs, and told Susanna to keep the child in the nursery a day or 2, until it's decided what's to be done, which both women understood to mean, until Mrs. Hale had decided how to make it right, without either of them losing their place over it. Susanna refused the doctor's fee when it was offered back to her from the household purse, on the grounds that she had not asked anyone to spend money on her account. She refused, too, the extra ration of milk Mrs. Hale tried to send up, saying she would manage on what was allowed her, and was plainly embarrassed when Mrs. Hale set it down anyway, and told her not to be a fool about it. She wanted no one thanking her. She wanted no one particularly noticing her at all, and so it unsettled her more than she could account for when 3 days later a note came down from the master of the house, directing that coal be increased to the servants' wing for the remainder of the season, with no further explanation given. And the nursery in particular. She did not connect this to herself. She had no reason to. The Duke of Rothwell was, to her, a name and a set of closed doors, a tall man glimpsed twice at a distance in a greatcoat, grave-faced, not given to speaking to the female staff beyond what was required. She thought the extra coal a mercy of the season, and nothing more, and was glad of it for the foundling's sake, and did not think of it again. She did not know then that the coal had been ordered the morning after he had seen her cross the yard, nor that he had sent, that same week, for the village physician to cool quietly, and settle a standing account for the child's care, with strict word that no name be attached to the payment. He had done this sort of thing before, more than once, in more than one household matter, and he had always done it in the same way. No one thanked him for it, because no one but Mrs. Hale, who kept his accounts, ever knew whose hand it came from, and Mrs. Hale had learned a long time ago not to speak of it. The foundling was named Peter, for want of anything better, after the saint whose day it had nearly been when he was found, and he lived, against what the parish would have predicted, through that whole hard winter, in the nursery at Rothwell Hall, under Susanna's hands, alongside her own son, who took to sharing his basket with a stranger's child as easily as breathing. It was some weeks later, in the library, on an evening when she had gone down for a book of simples she had heard the housekeeper mention, that Susanna first spoke more than a dozen words to the Duke of Rothwell in her life. She had not expected him to be there. The room was lit by one lamp, and the last of the fire, and he was seated in the window with a ledger he was not reading. And when she came in with her candle and saw him, she stopped in the doorway and made to withdraw at once. "Stay," he said. "You came for something. A book, Your Grace." "I did not know the room was taken. It is a library. It is meant to be taken." He watched her a moment, the way he watched most things, as if weighing whether they would bear the weight of his attention before he gave it. "You are the one who found the child in the yard. I am, Your Grace. You did not think to wake the house. No, Your Grace." She did not offer an excuse for it. She had found, over a lifetime of being poor and being questioned, that excuses only invited more questions, and that the plain truth, however it looked, was the shortest way through. "I thought the child would not live to be woken for." He was quiet a moment. The fire popped once, and settled. "What is it you wanted from the shelf?" She told him, and to her surprise he rose and found it for her himself, a slim volume on fevers in infants translated some years before from a French physician, and he asked her, handing it across, a plain question about the foundling's chest, whether it had cleared, whether the cough had gone dry yet, with the particular attention of a man who had once sat up through fevers of his own and remembered exactly what a bad night sounded like. "You know something of it yourself." "Your Grace," she said, before she could think better of saying it. "I had a mother who was ill a great deal, and a nurse who taught me more of sick rooms than of Latin." Something crossed his face, brief, gone before it had properly arrived. "The nurse is still living. I am told she asks after nobody's opinion of her, but does a great deal of good regardless of whether anybody thanks her for it. I find I respect that more than I respect most things done for an audience." Susanna did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and took her book, and made her plain curtsy, which was really no curtsy at all, more a nod of the head, and went back up to the nursery with her candle guttering in the draught of the stair. She did not think much more of the exchange. She had no reason yet to think that the old nurse he spoke of was living, at that very hour, in a cottage 2 miles off, on a pension he had settled on her himself and told her not to name him for, or that he had been, in his own quiet way, testing the shape of her answers the whole time they spoke. She had been at Rothwell Hall 4 months when Lady Prudence Marsh came to stay for the season. Lady Prudence was the Duke's aunt on his father's side, a widow herself, handsome in the hard way of a house kept very cold. And she had run Rothwell Hall's society before her nephew came into the title, and had not entirely given up the habit of running it since. She arrived with 3 trunks and a great deal of opinion about how a household ought to be conducted, and within the first week she had found her way, as such women generally do, to the one thing in the house that did not answer to her. She found Susanna in the linen room, mending, with Peter asleep in a basket at her feet, because there was nowhere else convenient to leave him while her hands were needed, and she stood in the doorway a long moment, taking in the picture before she spoke. "And this," Lady Prudence said, "is the creature who has my nephew paying for coal, like a man with no sense of proportion." Her laugh, when it came, was a small precise thing, 3 notes exactly, like a bell struck and stopped. A parish brat and a nursery maid with hands like a fishwife's, and half the household talking as though a saint had come to live among us. Susanna set down her mending. "I did not ask for the coal, my lady. No, you are far too clever to ask for anything outright." Lady Prudence came a step nearer, looked at Susanna's hands, reddened and cracked from lye and cold water, with open distaste. "I know your sort. Poor, and pretty enough in a plain way, and very good at being seen doing kind things where a duke might happen to be looking. It is a very old trade, dressed up in a very humble apron." "I did not know his grace was looking," Susanna said. "I found the child in the yard at 2 a.m. There was no one to see but the snow." "So you say." "So I say, because it is true, my lady, and I have no other way of saying it. She did not raise her voice, she did not look away. I would have done the same for any creature left out to die, whoever owned the house I found it behind. I am sorry if that offends you." For a moment Lady Prudence only looked at her, and something in the girl's flat, unfrightened steadiness seemed to catch her off guard more than any pleading would have done. Then the door behind her opened, and the Duke was there, and had plainly heard enough of it to need no more explained to him. "Aunt," he said, "you will not speak to my staff in that manner in my house. I was only observing, Edmund, that a maid who sleeps with foundlings in her care ought perhaps to sleep with them somewhere less likely to be remarked upon." His voice did not rise either, but it went very flat, very final. The voice of a man closing a ledger on a debt he had decided not to extend further credit against. "Mrs. Reed found an abandoned child in a snowstorm and kept it alive through her own effort, at her own inconvenience, without being asked, and without expecting to be thanked for it. If you require an example of good character in this house, you have just been standing in front of one." Lady Prudence's mouth thinned. She said nothing further, only inclined her head, the barest fraction, and swept from the room with her 3 practised notes of laughter nowhere in evidence. Susanna, left alone with the Duke and the sleeping child and her own reddened hands folded very still in her lap, did not thank him. She had learned by then that thanking him for things only seemed to embarrass them both. "You did not need to defend me, Your Grace," she said instead. "I did not do it for you," he said, which was not quite true, and they both, in their different ways, understood that it was not quite true, and neither of them said anything further about it. The winter that followed was the hardest in memory, and it was in the worst of it, in February, when Peter took a fever that would not break, and Tom, teething and fretful, would not be parted from his mother for an hour together, that Susanna found herself, on the 4th sleepless night, carrying both children through the sleeping-house in search of a room with a fire still lit, because the nursery grate had gone out, and she had not the strength left to build it again, and nurse 2 crying infants at once. She knew the estate-room kept its fire banked through the night on the housekeeper's standing order, for the Duke sometimes worked there past midnight, and she knew, too, that he had gone that evening to dine at a neighbouring house, and would not be back before morning, or so she had been told below stairs. She meant only to sit by the fire a while, to warm the children through, and be gone again before anyone was the wiser. She did not mean to fall asleep. She had not slept properly in 4 nights, and the chair by the fire was deep, and Peter's fever had broken at last under the warmth and gone quiet against her shoulder, and Tom had settled into the crook of her other arm, and the fire was very warm, and she was very tired, and she did not decide to close her eyes so much as simply lose the argument with herself about staying awake. When the room's own bed, turned down and waiting, proved nearer and softer than the chair, she carried the children to it without fully waking to the decision, and lay down between them, and slept the dead sleep of a woman who has not slept in 4 days. She woke to candlelight, and Lady Prudence's voice, pitched to carry the length of the corridor. "Edmund, Edmund, come and see what has made itself at home in your bed." The Duke had returned earlier than expected, the roads having frozen too hard for a comfortable drive back after dark, and he came to the doorway of his own bedchamber to find his aunt standing over it, with an expression of triumph she did not trouble to disguise, and Susanna sitting bolt upright among the pillows with a child on each arm, and her hair loose down her back, and no possible explanation that would not sound, spoken aloud in that cold corridor, exactly as damning as it looked. "I can explain," she said. "I am sure you can," Lady Prudence said. "Girls of your sort generally can." Susanna did not wait to hear whether the Duke believed her or not. She saw his face, unreadable, still with the shock of the thing not yet settled into any expression at all, and she took it, in her exhaustion and her shame, for judgment already past. She gathered the children and her shawl, and left the room without waiting to be told to, and by morning she had written her resignation in her own hand, in careful, unpractised letters, and left it with Mrs. Hale, and was gone from Rothwell Hall before the Duke had risen, walking the frozen road toward the village with her son on her hip, and Peter, whom no one else could be persuaded to take, bundled against her other side. She did not know then that the Duke had gone straight from the doorway of his own room to his aunt's, and told her, in language Mrs. Hale later described as the coldest she had heard him use in 15 years of service, that she was to leave Rothwell Hall within the week, and not return to it while he held the title. She did not know that he had gone to his own bedchamber afterward, and found, tucked half under the pillow where she had lain, a scrap of paper in her plain hand, meant for Mrs. Hale and never delivered, apologising for the liberty taken with the room, promising to make up the coal and the linen from her own wages, and asking at the very end, in words that undid something in him he had thought fully secured, that no blame be laid on the child for where his mother had chosen, in her tiredness, to lay him down. Mrs. Hale found the Duke standing in the doorway of his own room a long while that morning, the note still in his hand, and it was she, in the end, who told him what he had not let himself piece together before. That the coal he had ordered without his name attached, the physician's account he had settled without his name attached, the pension paid quietly to his old nurse in her cottage, all of it, every kindness he had done in that house for 15 years without ever once wanting credit for it, was exactly, precisely, the same shape of thing the girl walking the frozen road that morning had done for a stranger's child on a doorstep, and had done again, without calculation, in the worst hour of a fever night, and had been driven from his house for. "You have been looking for someone who does good the way you do it, Mrs., Hale said. Unwatched and unpaid, and embarrassed to be caught at it. You found her in December, Your Grace, and you have very nearly lost her in February. He rode for the village within the hour. He found her at the almshouse on the edge of Elmcote, in a room with a single window and a fire too small for the cold, sitting with both children asleep at last against her, and when he came through the door she rose at once, startled and pale, and made to explain herself again before he raised a hand and stopped her. "You do not need to explain yourself to me," he said. "I am the one who has explaining to do." He sat, because she would not, and told her plainly, without ornament, the whole of it. That he had seen her that first night from the estate-room window, and had not been able to stop watching for her since. That he had ordered the coal, and paid the physician, and told no one, because he had learned long ago that a kindness announced was worth less than a kindness given and forgotten, and he had wanted, more than he had let himself admit even to Mrs. Hale, to see what she would do when she believed no one of any consequence was watching at all. That is the only test that tells the truth about a person, he said. Not what they do for an audience, what they do for no one. You have passed it 12 times over, and I let my aunt drive you into the snow for it, because I did not speak quickly enough. You need not have come after me, your grace. I did not come for the children's sake, though I am glad enough of them. He looked at her a long moment, the fire small and orange in his tired eyes. I came because I have spent 15 years doing good by stealth, and never once been seen for it, and never once minded, because I never expected to be seen at all. And then I watched a woman in her nightclothes kneel in the snow for a child that was nothing to her, and I have not been able to think of anything else since. I do not want a wife who admires the Duke of Rothwell. I have met a great many women who can manage that without effort. I want the woman who put a stranger's dying child against her own skin because there was no one else to do it, and asked nothing after. And I do not care what she is called below stairs, or how red her hands are, or what my aunt thinks a nursery maid is fit for. Susanna said nothing for a long moment. The fire popped once, and outside somewhere a robin called, once into the frozen morning, the first birdsong she had heard in weeks. "I will not ask you to answer me today," he said, before she could. "I have no wish to be given a yes out of gratitude, or out of having nowhere else to go. I would rather have your honest no, given freely, than a yes you did not choose. Take the room here as long as you need it. The physician's account stays open, whatever you decide of me. You are very determined not to be thanked for anything, your grace," she said, and there was, for the first time since he had known her, the ghost of something dry in it, almost a smile. "I have found that being thanked generally means the thing was done for the wrong reason," he said. "I would rather you decided this for the right one." She did not answer him that day, or the next. She thought of it the way she thought of most things, plainly, turning it over without dressing it up as anything grander than it was. On the 3rd day she walked back to Rothwell Hall herself, on her own 2 feet, with both children, and found him in the library, where she had first properly spoken to him, and stood in the doorway the way she had stood in it that first evening. "I have an answer," she said. He rose. He did not come to her at once. He waited, the way he had learned over a long courtship of restraint, to wait for her. "You said once that you did not want to be thanked for what you did, because it meant it had been done for the wrong reason." She came into the room properly now, and set Tom down on the hearthrug, where he sat contentedly gumming a corner of the rug, entirely unconcerned with dukes. "I find I feel the same about being married. I will not say yes because you are a duke, or because you have been kind to us, or because I have nowhere else so warm to take my children. If I say it, I mean to say it, because when I think of the man who found me in a doorway of the coldest house in this county, I do not think of his rank at all. I think of a man who has spent 15 years doing kindnesses no one was meant to know about, the same as I have, That is the only reason I would ever say yes to anybody." "Then say it," he said, "for that reason. Or not at all." "Yes," she said. It was the only word she needed. He crossed to her then, and took her hand, and drew the worn glove from it, finger by finger, slowly, as though the plainness of her bare red hand mattered to him more than any smoother one might have, and pressed his mouth to her knuckles once, gravely, the way a man seals a bargain he has waited a long time to be allowed to make. Neither of them spoke of duchesses, or estates, or of what his aunt, safely removed by then to her sister's house in Scarborough, with a letter of instruction Mrs. Hale had watched him burn unread some weeks later, might have to say of it. There was nothing in the room but the fire, and the children on the hearthrug, and two people who had each, in their own separate silences, spent years being good for no one's benefit but their own conscience, finally allowing themselves to be seen. They were married quietly, in the small stone church at Elmcote, in a ceremony a duke's rank made grand only by the number of tenants who came uninvited to stand in the yard and wish them well, and Mrs. Hale wept through the whole of it, without the least attempt at dignity. A year later, on a night when the first snow of the season had begun to come down slant across the windows of Rothwell Hall, Susanna sat by the fire in the estate room, with her husband's hand laced through her own, bare, both of them, the old worn glove long retired to a drawer, and kept for no reason either of them could quite explain, except that it seemed wrong to throw it away. Tom, walking now, unsteady and delighted with himself, chased Peter, sturdy and loud and entirely at home, across the same hearthrug where he had once sat gumming its corner while his mother gave her answer. The quilt Susanna had mended, and mended again through that first hard winter, the one that had wrapped a dying stranger's child back into life on a kitchen floor, lay folded now across the foot of their bed, kept for its own sake, because some things earn a place simply by having been useful when nothing else was. Their hands, that night, did not let go. It is a small thing, in the end, what a person does when they believe no one is watching. It is also the only thing worth knowing about them at all,